Water. In fact, I want to write that down. So yeah, what causes plants to grow? Water's a big one. What else could affect that? Absolutely. Getting enough sunlight. It needs to get specifically CO2, but yes. Is there anything else that could influence a plant, make it grow better, make it grow worse? The soil. And that's like the mineral, yeah, like the soil it's planted in. What could I add to soil to make it grow better? Fertilizers, yeah, which are specifically, those are usually organic compounds like nitrogen and stuff like that. You can use natural ones like there's bones. Bones are really good fertilizer, actually, for example. But yeah, fertilizer is a really big one. Is there any other things that could? Temperature can be a big one as well. But yeah, so these are things that can promote or inhibit plant growth. If it's planted in really crappy soil, it's not going to grow as good. If it's in a colder climate, it might not grow as good. So on and so forth. So we want to be looking at what is the purpose of these things um, in it. But specifically, where we're really going with today is we're going into photosynthesis. Is the really big picture of today. So we're going to be looking at photosynthesis. We're going to be looking at those chloroplasts. If you remember, from this is like the second day of class, we looked at the inside of a eukaryotic cell, and it was that green stuff, right? That's those chloroplasts right there. So we're going to be looking at what photosynthesis is. It's two phases. What happens with those chloroplasts when light hits it, because we know it has to work in light. And then we're going to be looking at some electron transport, along with some other things. You don't need to write this down, but again, this is going to be the most chemistry intensive stuff here. So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of talk about this terminology. Like, what does this mean? This stuff down here looks pretty scary, right? So what this means is that there's 6 carbon atoms, and that's bonded to 2 oxygen molecules, and so 6 CO2. There's 6 things of CO2 all joined together. So basically how it works, how photosynthesis works is in a chemical process, which you are not going to need to memorize this, so don't worry about that. I just want to make sure we can read it. So 6 CO2 molecules and 6 water molecules come together and they get hit by light. So you have CO2, you have water, they get hit by light. What ends up happening then is through the process of photosynthesis, we get an output now of we get 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms, and then 6 pure oxygens. This is how plants create oxygen. They suck in CO2 and water, and then they spit out. This is an energy right here. This is a sugar, and then this is oxygen. So again, if you're really thinking about this, like take away the chemistry, it's CO2, it's water, you add light to it, photosynthesis happens. What you get spinning out is you're going to get sugar and you're going to get oxygen. So that's what it's going to end up being here. So where we're going to go with today is we are going to start with section 8.2. Now I fixed our printer. Well, not that. I don't know about I'm losing something. Where did I put it? Here we go. So we are going to have, again, there are diagrams and stuff. I don't want to make you guys have to draw those. So I've printed this stuff out here for you guys to be able to do. Again, I'm not going to make you guys draw a full-on cell. So what I've done is I printed this out. This can serve as a lot of your notes because there's a lot of notes today and I don't want us to have to double dip if we don't have to. So we're going to be looking at photosynthesis here. So we'll be reading section 8.2. We're going to come together again at about, this time it'll be 2:15, and we're going to try and power through it pretty quickly. I'm going to try and reduce the amount of notes we take because you guys have this. I just want to load up my textbook really, really quickly. Sorry, what page was that one again? Is that 220, 222? Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, you're going to start out here with your you're going to start with the light reactions, and then you're going to be going through the process of the cell and how that works. We'll talk about these two different types of chlorophyll and carotenoids and all this fun stuff here as well. You guys can probably, if you're looking at this picture here, you can get a good idea of what that is, right? Color is light waves. So these are just different light waves, different colors. So I'll give you guys about an hour-ish for that. We'll meet together then. Okay, so let's start going through photosynthesis now that we've kind of read about it here. So again, this is our chemical formula for it. You're not going to need to memorize that. The one thing you're just going to need to know is that CO2 plus water goes through photosynthesis. It spits out sugar, spits glucose, and it spits out oxygen. So photosynthesis actually happens in two separate phases here. And so again, this is in your notes, so you shouldn't have to write that down. But it's in two. One of them is called the light dependent phase. This is when you actually get the light. So this is the sun, right? This is during the day. So light energy gets converted to the chemical energy. In the light independent phase, the chemical energy then creates glucose. So it turns the light into chemical energy, and then it uses the chemical energy to make glucose, sugar. So right here is an actual plant cell and chloroplast. So, just zooming in, right? Here's a leaf. Here's a piece of the leaf. We zoom in on that. This is the tissue layer. We get the plant cell and we get the chloroplast. I really like the model that they have for this. So I like showing this one here. But so this right here is a cell wall here. Sorry, this is a plant cell. And so it has membranes that lets it join to the next one. If I get rid of that stuff though, right? This is cell wall. Let me just get rid of those crap here. There we go. So this is a plant cell here. So if I remove that, I find myself having the actual cell membrane. Because remember, the membrane's below it. Below the membrane is our chloroplast, or sorry, cytoplasm. And now, again, we know that, oh, green. This is where photosynthesis happens, right? This is our chloroplast. So if I get rid of that, inside these granulums is where that ends up happening. So this is where that light independent phase enacts itself. And light dependent and light independent. So it happens within that chloroplast. Again, what we just looked at is that granule. So the thylakoid is where that phase one starts, and the stroma is where that phase two starts. Phase one, light dependent. Phase two, light independent, right? Think about it day than night, day than night. That way you'll know which one's when. So for the first phase here, basically the light gets absorbed. Again, not that deep with photosynthesis. But once it's captured, it's either stored as ATP, if you remember, that's our battery, or NAPDH, also another battery. So again, light gets stored and the energy gets stored into batteries. As humans, we store our energy in fat. Plants, this is the plant's version of fat. So with phase one, this is where it starts in the chloroplast, right? So these are what capture that light energy. So when your plant's sitting there in the sun, this is where that light is going into. And it's going into two things. The first one is the thylakoid, which we just talked about. So it's the thylakoid, and these are all stacked on top of each other. So again, this little red line here, that's a thylakoid. But if I stack a bunch of them, just like I can stack batteries, I end up with that granum or granum. So it's a stack of these thylakoids. Okay. And then again, that fluid is just called the stroma. So this is just that picture there, right? So just zoomed in again. One of these is the thylakoid, but you stack up a whole bunch of them, you end up with a granum, which is what these things are here. So when we were looking at that model, that's what those were. So with this phase one here, so we have those light absorbent molecules. Those are called pigments. We've heard of those before. Pigments are the wavelengths of color, right? This is how we perceive color. Have you guys ever shown like you ever shown like a light through like a crystal or something? Like you see the rainbow on the other end of it. You've probably seen that like in you've seen that phenomenon somewhere. Light goes through a glass and on the other end is a rainbow. Again, light is visible in different colors depending on its wavelength, how far apart the waves are is what changes its color. So those light absorbing molecules are called pigments, and those are found in those batteries. So those different pigments absorb those different wavelengths of light. The most common one is chlorophyll. There's also other ones. So we have chlorophyll here, right? And so we can see that it's absorbing the green one here is just absorbing different types of light. So in this case, 100% of the light is almost absorbed at this wavelength and this color. But I can see at a yellow light, very little of it is absorbed. So what happens when chlorophyll starts to break down? Plants are green, right? But what happens to them in the fall? Changes color. So when chlorophyll breaks down, you get that change in colors there. That's what ends up happening here. So again, this is all still on phase one. So this is all the light reactions, right? Light dependent. So those thylakoids, again, these things right here. Oops. So those membranes have a really big surface area, and that lets a lot of these electrons transport the molecules and the proteins. So these membranes are what help the electrons and the proteins transport, is really where it goes down to. And I think you guys have that in there. Yes. So we're going to summarize this. This is probably the most complicated thing in the entire class right here. So these electrons, so they get excited, they get energized, right? When things get energized, they move quicker. If you were to hook up like a really strong battery to something, you were to overload like a little like RC car, it's going to go way quicker. It's going to burn out, but it'll go quicker. So the light energy excites these electrons, and then all this excitement and this light causes a water molecule to split, which creates another electron, and that spits that into the system. So basically, light excites the electrons, and it causes a water molecule to split, and it spits out another electron. So we got light here, hits our chlorophylls, and then this is where that system comes in. So those electrons, they move to the photosystem, from the photosystem to a molecule in the membrane. Again, we're going to summarize this. This is quite detailed and more complex than it needs to be. So what happens when we're in light? This photosystem 1 transfers those electrons to a protein called a ferredoxin, and that protein then puts the electrons into an NADP plus, which is where this thing comes in. So again, plants store their energy as ATP, which is what we learned about earlier, or NADPH, which is another energy storage thing. So all this is just a fancy way to say is they add on some electrons to create NADPH. It's a really fancy way of saying that. We've added on an electron to create this energy storage molecule. So we've stored our energy. Now we need to spread it out. When you have a battery, you need to spread it out through the whole machine. When a plant has its energy from its chloroplast, it needs to spread it out to the rest of the plant. So this ATP that was made is produced with the electron transfer system through something called chemiosmosis, which you do not need to memorize at all. So basically, ADP is produced through the flow of electrons, and it's gone down that concentration gradient. If these look familiar, these are those transport proteins that we learned about in the first week here. So it talks about the concentration gradient as well. It's moving from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. So this is why water is really useful. It's because water is what creates these electrons. The water is what creates the electrons that turn it into battery storage, that enables those electrons to be able to move throughout the system, that enables that power generation and that power distribution. So let's take a step back from all the sciencey stuff here. I know that's really deep. What does it mean when something's organic? We see this all the time. What's organic mean? Where's a place you see it a lot? Grocery stores, right? On food. So like what's organic? Would you say apples are organic? Yeah, probably. What about like a raw steak? Is that organic? Comes from nature, comes from animals? Sure. What about like a box of Triscuit crackers? No. So organic is one of those terms where it's kind of hard to define, and it doesn't mean anything. If you see something on like a box of cereal or anything, any food item, it says all organic, that means nothing. Zip. It is not a legally protected term. So organic refers to compounds that contain carbon. Any living thing we know of has carbon in it. When they look for aliens, they're looking for carbon-based life forms. So carbon's really important with the second phase of this photosynthesis cycle. So the whole point of the first phase was to generate that power. Sorry, to absorb that light and turn that into chemical energy. So now we're going into the second phase, which is when we take this energy that's stored in, we take this energy and we store it as glucose. So we call this the Calvin cycle. So I will print this out for you guys. You guys should have this in, oh, you don't have the picture. Okay. I will print this out for you guys. Just so you do have it. But so again, the second phase builds those sugars. So I'm going to blow up this picture a little bit here. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? So if we kind of follow it, again, we're at step one here. We have our CO2. That's for great. First thing we looked at today was that CO2. We have these 12,3 PGAs. We're going to go into this. Basically, we have our CO2. That creates energy. It gets stored. And then it's going to get used and turned into sugars. So we're going to zoom in on just step one. So just this part here. What's happening here? So we call this carbon fixation. But basically, those CO2 molecules, plants need CO2, those combine with carbon and they form this thing. 3-phosphoglycerate. So 3-phosphoglycerate. You're not going to need to say that. You're not going to need to memorize that. There's a reason we use acronyms, right? So we have this CO2 and it gets combined with carbon and it forms this 12,3 PGA, 12,3 PGAs. So that's the first step. The second step, we take this energy from this ATP, from these NADPHs. Remember, those are those batteries. We take this energy and we're going to transfer it to these molecules. So we're transferring it to these molecules, and once we energize them, we get this thing over here. This is called, glycerol. glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Again, G3P. So we take those, we energize it, we get G3P. And then the final step, what's going to happen is we're going to take some of this, we're going to take a couple of these, and we're going to be using those to create the glucose. So we're taking some of that those energized particles, we're going to turn that into sugars. And then the last step, we get an enzyme here called rubisco, which digests those remaining things, those remaining particles, into all of this stuff here, ribulose and biphosphate and all these other chemical compounds. But basically, it just transforms into stuff that's going to continue the cycle. So when we're using energy, we are only taking out a little bit at a time. This is all we're taking out to form into sugars. The rest of it goes into a self-feeding loop. It just goes around and around and around, and we just take out a little bit of it at a time. So here's what the 4 steps look like all together. The first one is we have that carbon fixation. We combine the CO2. We then store, we convert the energy that's stored into these cells. Some of those leave to be turned to sugars, and the rest of it gets converted and later continues the cycle. If we're breaking it down as much as possible, that's kind of where it ends up at. Do I really? I don't think I need to talk about this. I don't think I do need to talk about this. Yeah, no, we're good. We don't need to worry about this one. We do need to worry about this though, the CAM plants. So CAM stands for crassulation acid metabolism. It's found in desert plants. Basically, how these things work is they collect that CO2 at night and then they store it and then they release this so it can be used for that light dependent. Because remember, you need the CO2 for the light dependent. So it's storing it and it's saving it until there is light. Not that important though. These CAM plants aren't that important. These C4 plants aren't that important. These are some exceptions to the rule. The Calvin cycle otherwise is what you can expect to see in almost every single plant. These are mostly just for desert plants. Okay. So what I'm going to get you guys to do here is we're gonna summarize this stuff here. You're gonna need just about like 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines. For the Calvin cycle here, you guys are gonna want like, oh God, this one's gonna be a lot. I'll just be honest with you, it's a lot. You're gonna want like 7 or 8 lines. It's a lot. And then just 1 line for the next one. I'll give you a minute to write that stuff down here. Okay, everyone good to go? Yeah, so we want to summarize how chemical energy is formed from light energy from photosynthesis. Again, we've learned a lot today. Let's try and keep it simple. Light energy is converted to ATOP and then to NADPH, which are then turned to glucose. Phase one, we turn to these. Phase two, we turn to glucose. These are your energies. These are your batteries. This is your glucose. Sorry, not ATOP, ATP. It's turned to a battery. Gets turned to sugar. So this next card here is asking us, so when it says relate the structure of a chloroplast to the phase, it's what does the chloroplast do for each phase of photosynthesis is really the fancy thing it's asking us there. So we know that protoplasts contain those thylakoids, those stacked batteries, right? We know that those are where those light dependent reactions happen. So in the chloroplast, you have the thylakoids, which use the light dependent, and you have the stroma, which is where the light independent reactions take place. So you use a different organ for different things, but it's all still happening in the chloroplast. So we know water is really useful for plants. Sorry, I think you guys are still writing. So we know water is really useful. Why is it useful though for the plant? Obviously, it keeps it alive, but specifically, water creates the gets those electrons and those hydrogen atoms for that ATP. Without water, you don't have the energy storage. Okay, so this is the doozy. This is the big one. The Calvin cycle's complex, right? It's a lot of chemistry. Um, so there are 4 steps in this cycle. The first one's that carbon fixation. Remember this is that big wheel. This is when your CO2 combines with carbon and it creates those 3 pp's. In fact, I'm gonna put that in there. What's it? 3 pga. Step 1, your CO2 combines to carbon, creates 3 pga. Step 2, your batteries energize those molecules to form the G3P. So now we've energized these molecules. We have G3P. What ends up happening now is we siphon off a little bit of them. We take 2 of these. So 2 of these molecules leave to create sugar, and the others are put back into the cycle after they get converted. That's about as summed up as I'm really able to make it. Like I said, that's the most complex thing we're really doing in the entire course. Um, we just so happen to start the course with the hardest units. I promise you guys, it gets smoother. It's going to make a lot more sense as we keep going forward. And so last one, basically, we think about environmental factors. Is if I take a plant and I put it in a place where it's going to have strong light intensity and lots of carbon dioxide, what's going to happen to that plant? So it's in a place with lots of CO2 and lots of sunlight. It's going to like explode, right? Like it's gonna be really it's going to grow really well. It has what it needs. If I put it somewhere where it doesn't get a lot of light, it's not going to grow as well. If I put it somewhere that doesn't have a lot of CO2, it's not going to grow as well. So basically, we know that if we increase light and we increase CO2, we increase the photosynthesis rate. It's making more energy. It can grow. It can then expend that energy to grow. This is why greenhouses work, right? It directs the sunlight in there. It keeps it warmer longer. It creates an environment where there's more CO2 in the air. Okay, so that's it for today. Like I said, this was really heavy, but photosynthesis really complicated, right? But at its core, it's just converting the light into chemical energy and diverting that into some sugars. So where we got a couple minutes left here. So what you guys can do, and what I really recommend you do, is spend some time making some flashcards specifically about these questions, specifically about the Calvin cycle. This is a really deep and difficult topic. There's so much to memorize. The chemistry is a big curveball. So I recommend while it's fresh in your head that you guys quickly do that. Um, because otherwise when you come back to this in like, I guess 4 or 5 weeks, it's not going to be as crisp.